The avoidant operates from a foundation of profound hypocrisy that permeates every aspect of their relationship behavior, creating double standards that consistently benefit them while disadvantaging their partners. This hypocrisy isn't necessarily conscious or malicious, but it represents a systematic pattern of contradictions between what they expect from others and what they're willing to provide, what they demand for themselves and what they deny to their partners, what they claim to value and how they actually behave. Understanding these hypocritical patterns reveals the fundamental selfishness disguised as psychological complexity that characterizes avoidant attachment. The avoidant's hypocrisy manifests in their ability to demand understanding, patience, and accommodation for their emotional limitations, while showing little tolerance for their partner's emotional needs, insecurities, or attachment requirements. They expect others to respect their need for space while feeling entitled to pursue when they want connection. They want their trauma and attachment wounds to be honored and worked around while dismissing their partner's wounds as neediness or emotional instability. This systematic double standard creates relationships where the avoidant's psychological needs are prioritized while their partner's needs are minimized or pathologized. The most damaging aspect of avoidant hypocrisy is how it's often presented as enlightened relationship philosophy or superior emotional intelligence. They frame their emotional unavailability as healthy boundaries, their inconsistency as authenticity, their selfishness as self-care. This reframing allows them to maintain moral superiority while engaging in behavior that would be considered selfish or harmful if exhibited by anyone else. Their partners often find themselves apologizing for normal emotional needs, while the avoidant receives praise for behaviors that damage relationships and hurt others. The space and pursuit hypocrisy. The avoidant's most glaring hypocrisy involves their contradictory approach to space and pursuit in relationships. They demand unlimited space and understanding when they need to withdraw, expecting their partners to respect their emotional rhythms without question or complaint. However, when they desire connection or attention, they often become frustrated if their partner isn't immediately available or responsive. This creates a dynamic where the avoidant's timing and needs always take precedence, while their partner's emotional availability is taken for granted. When avoidants withdraw, they expect their partners to understand that this distance isn't personal rejection, but necessary self-care. They want their space to be honored without pressure, guilt, or emotional demands for explanation or timeline. They frame their withdrawal as mature emotional regulation that should be respected by anyone who truly understands healthy relationships. However, when their partner needs space to process hurt feelings, establish boundaries, or focus on personal goals, the avoidant often interprets this as punishment, manipulation, or evidence that their partner doesn't really love them. The hypocrisy extends to their expectations about pursuit and initiation. Avoidants typically want their partners to give them space during withdrawal periods without pursuing or pressuring them for connection. Yet when they're ready to reconnect, they often expect their partner to be immediately available and responsive, showing little patience if their partner has emotionally withdrawn or isn't ready to resume connection immediately. They want the freedom to control the relationship's emotional temperature, while expecting their partner to remain consistently available for their convenience. This double standard creates relationships where the avoidant's emotional needs and timing always take priority. Their partner learns to accommodate their need for space while remaining ready to provide connection when the avoidant desires it. Meanwhile, the partner's needs for consistency, emotional availability, or processing time are often dismissed as unreasonable demands that threaten the avoidant's autonomy or emotional safety. The space and pursuit hypocrisy also manifests in how avoidants interpret their partner's behavior versus their own. When they withdraw, it's necessary self-care. When their partner withdraws, it's emotional manipulation or punishment. When they're inconsistent, it's authenticity and following their natural rhythms. When their partner is inconsistent, it's instability or game playing. This interpretation bias allows them to maintain their self-image as the reasonable party while casting their partner as emotionally problematic. The vulnerability and emotional expression. Hypocrisy. Avoidance demonstrates stunning hypocrisy in their approach to vulnerability and emotional expression, demanding understanding and patience for their emotional limitations while showing little tolerance for their partner's emotional needs or expressions. They expect their partners to accept their inability to be consistently vulnerable while becoming frustrated when their partners express emotions in ways that feel overwhelming or demanding to their psychology. The avoidant wants their emotional unavailability to be understood as protection rather than rejection, their difficulty with vulnerability to be seen as depth rather than limitation, their delayed emotional processing to be respected rather than criticized. They expect their partners to make endless allowances for their emotional constraints while interpreting their partner's emotional expressions as pressure, manipulation, or evidence of instability. When avoidants do share vulnerabilities, they often expect these rare moments to be received with extraordinary gratitude and care, as though their partner should feel honored by the privilege of their emotional openness. They want their minimal emotional sharing to be valued as precious gifts, while treating their partner's more frequent emotional expression as burdensome or excessive. This creates a dynamic where the avoidant's emotional contributions are overvalued while their partners are taken for granted or criticized. The hypocrisy also appears in how they frame emotional expression as mature versus immature. The avoidant's emotional restraint is positioned as emotional intelligence and self-control, while their partner's more open emotional expression is characterized as drama, neediness, or lack of emotional regulation. This framing allows them to maintain superiority while avoiding accountability for their emotional limitations. Avoidants often demand that their partners understand and accommodate their communication style, indirect, understated, requiring interpretation, while showing little patience for their partner's communication needs. They want their subtle expressions of care to be recognized and appreciated, while finding their partner's more direct emotional communication overwhelming or demanding. This creates relationships where communication must always accommodate the avoidant's comfort level, while their partner's communication needs are secondary. The independence and commitment hypocrisy. Perhaps the most fundamental avoidant hypocrisy involves their contradictory relationship with independence and commitment. They demand the freedom to maintain their autonomy and make unilateral decisions about the relationship, while expecting their partner to provide consistent emotional availability and commitment. This creates relationships where the avoidant enjoys the benefits of both independence and partnership, while their partner experiences the responsibilities of commitment without its security. Avoidants often insist on maintaining complete freedom to change their mind about the relationship, to explore other options, or to withdraw when things become challenging. They frame this freedom as healthy self-preservation and authentic living that should be respected by anyone who truly loves them. However, they often expect their partners to remain consistently committed and available despite this uncertainty, viewing any emotional withdrawal or boundary setting as evidence that their partner doesn't really understand or accept them. The hypocrisy extends to their expectations about sacrifice and accommodation in relationships. Avoidants typically resist making accommodations for their partner's needs, framing such requests as threats to their autonomy or attempts to control them. Yet they often expect their partners to make endless accommodations for their emotional limitations, scheduling preferences, and relationship boundaries. They want their needs to be prioritized while viewing their partner's needs as optional or negotiable. This pattern creates relationships where the avoidant maintains the benefits of single life, complete autonomy, freedom to change their mind, minimal responsibility for their partner's emotional well-being, while enjoying the benefits of partnership, emotional support, companionship, physical intimacy. Their partner, meanwhile, provides the consistency and commitment of a serious relationship while receiving the uncertainty and minimal investment typical of casual dating. The independence and commitment hypocrisy also manifests in their attitude toward future planning and shared goals. Avoidants often resist making concrete plans or commitments that might limit their future options, while expecting their partners to orient their lives around the relationship. They want the freedom to keep their options open, while expecting their partner to close off other possibilities in favor of their connection. The understanding and empathy hypocrisy. Avoidants consistently demand extraordinary understanding and empathy for their emotional struggles, while demonstrating limited capacity for understanding or empathizing with their partner's emotional experiences. They want their attachment wounds, childhood trauma, and emotional limitations to be treated with endless patience and compassion, while showing little tolerance for their partner's emotional struggles or healing needs. The avoidant expects their partner to educate themselves about attachment theory, read self-help books about loving avoidant partners, and develop sophisticated understanding of their psychological needs. They want their behavior to be interpreted through the lens of their attachment wounds rather than judged by its impact on others. However, they rarely show similar interest in understanding their partner's attachment style, emotional needs, or psychological struggles. This hypocrisy extends to their expectations about emotional labor in the relationship. Avoidants often expect their partners to do the majority of emotional work, initiating difficult conversations, managing conflict resolution, maintaining connection during challenging periods. They want their partner to be endlessly patient with their emotional limitations, while showing little appreciation for the emotional toll this takes on their partner. The understanding and empathy hypocrisy also appears in how they interpret relationship problems. When issues arise, avoidants often focus on how their partner's behavior affects them, while showing little consideration for how their own behavior impacts their partner. They want their emotional reactions to be understood and accommodated, while dismissing their partner's emotional responses as overreactions or attempts at manipulation. Avoidants frequently demand that their partners accept them exactly as they are, without trying to change them, while feeling free to criticize their partner's emotional needs, communication style, or relationship expectations. They want unconditional acceptance for their limitations, while maintaining the right to judge their partner's emotional requirements as excessive or unreasonable. The communication and interpretation hypocrisy. The avoidant demonstrates profound hypocrisy in their approach to communication and interpretation of relationship dynamics. They demand that their subtle, indirect communication style be understood and appreciated, while showing little patience for their partner's more direct communication needs. They want their understated expressions of care to be recognized, while finding their partner's clearer emotional expression overwhelming or manipulative. Avoidants often expect their partners to interpret their behavior charitably, understanding their withdrawal as self-care rather than rejection, their inconsistency as authenticity rather than unreliability, their emotional distance as protection rather than indifference. However, they frequently interpret their partner's behavior through the least charitable lens possible, seeing requests for emotional availability as demands, expressions of hurt as manipulation, or needs for reassurance as insecurity. This interpretation bias allows avoidants to maintain their self-image as the reasonable, mature party in the relationship, while casting their partner as emotionally problematic or demanding. They frame their emotional limitations as sophisticated self-awareness, while characterizing their partner's emotional needs as immaturity or psychological dysfunction. The communication hypocrisy also extends to their expectations about relationship discussions. Avoidants often resist direct conversations about relationship dynamics, future planning, or emotional needs, while expecting their partners to intuitively understand their unspoken needs and boundaries. They want their communication preferences to be accommodated, while showing little willingness to adapt to their partner's communication style. The consequences and accountability hypocrisy. Perhaps the most damaging aspect of avoidant hypocrisy involves their approach to consequences and accountability in relationships. They expect to be forgiven and understood for behaviors that hurt their partners while showing little tolerance for their partner's imperfections or mistakes. They want their harmful actions to be excused by their attachment wounds while holding their partners to higher standards of behavior and emotional regulation. Avoidants often demand that their partners overlook their emotional unavailability, inconsistency, and withdrawal patterns while becoming critical of their partner's emotional responses to these behaviors. They want their defensive patterns to be accepted as unchangeable aspects of their personality, while expecting their partners to modify their emotional needs and communication styles to accommodate these limitations. This hypocrisy extends to their expectations about relationship repair after they've caused harm. Avoidants often expect their partners to quickly forgive and move past hurt feelings while showing little willingness to make amends, change problematic behaviors, or provide the consistency needed to rebuild trust. They want the benefits of forgiveness without the responsibility of genuine accountability or behavior change. The consequences and accountability hypocrisy also appears in their attitude toward relationship endings. Avoidants often expect to be able to return to relationships after causing significant harm without facing appropriate consequences or having to earn back trust. They want immediate restoration of the relationship dynamic without acknowledging the impact of their previous behavior or demonstrating sustained change. The self-care and consideration hypocrisy. Avoidants consistently frame their self-serving behaviors as necessary self-care while showing little consideration for their partner's self-care needs or emotional well-being. They expect their partners to support their need for emotional space, independence, and autonomy, while providing little support for their partner's emotional needs or personal growth requirements. The avoidance version of self-care often involves behaviors that directly harm their partner: emotional withdrawal, communication avoidance, relationship uncertainty. But they expect these behaviors to be supported as necessary for their psychological health. However, when their partner engages in self-care behaviors that create distance or boundaries, the avoidant often interprets these as punishment or evidence that their partner doesn't really love them. This hypocrisy creates relationships where the avoidant's emotional needs are always prioritized as legitimate self-care, while their partner's needs are characterized as selfish demands that threaten the relationship. The partner learns to suppress their own needs while supporting the avoidant's need for emotional freedom and independence. Breaking free from avoidant hypocrisy. Understanding the pervasive nature of avoidant hypocrisy is crucial for anyone in relationship with an avoidant because it reveals why these relationships often feel so imbalanced and unsatisfying. The avoidant's systematic double standards create dynamics where their needs are always prioritized, while their partner's needs are minimized or pathologized. Breaking free from enabling avoidant hypocrisy requires refusing to accept different standards for different people in the relationship. It means insisting on reciprocal understanding, mutual accommodation, and equal consideration of both people's emotional needs and limitations. It requires calling out double standards rather than accepting them as natural relationship dynamics. Most importantly, it requires recognizing that the avoidant's psychological explanations for their behavior don't excuse the impact of that behavior on others. Understanding their attachment wounds provides context, but doesn't obligate anyone to accept treatment that doesn't serve their emotional needs and relationship goals. The goal isn't to punish avoidants for their hypocrisy, but to create relationships based on mutual respect and equal consideration, rather than one-sided accommodation of their emotional limitations. This requires partners who are willing to maintain their own standards and needs rather than sacrificing them for someone who consistently demonstrates that they won't provide the same consideration in return.